We ready to start? Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Peter Knight, and I've been actually in the sustainable investing field for almost 21 years. As they indicated, also the head of the Climate Museum. So I want to do a short commercial about the Climate Museum, which is here in New York City. Many people may not know that there is a climate museum in New York City. We're doing an exhibit starting in October in Soho, which we hope that everybody will come to see. It's really going to be pretty exciting. But we have a sneak preview of our exhibit here at the Nest Summit I think it's over there on the right side, by an incredible artist named David Opdyke. He's going to be here, and the head of the museum, Miranda Massey, amazing woman, is going to be here as well. So please take some time, go see the exhibit. It's all about climate change, but you can interpret it as you like. But I think it's a special treat for Nest to put that together for all of the people to enjoy. But we are here to talk to Andrei and Olivia, and thank you both for being here. And it's a special pleasure for me to be with Andrei. We worked together in the Clinton-Gore White House, and so this is kind of like old home week for us. I had been the chief of staff to Vice President Gore, and Andrei came in as a very young speechwriter, and as he started his career, which, by the way, I would say that one of the coolest jobs in the White House is being a speechwriter. A little stressful, maybe, but it's really exciting that both of us have turned out the rest of much of our careers in the area of sustainability. So I'm super excited to have a chance to talk to both of those. So listen, let's get started with Andrei, if you would. You've had an incredible career, done an awful lot of things, but over the last 10 have been focusing on Aspiration. How did you get inspired to build Aspiration? And tell us the backstory, your backstory, how you got there.
Well, thank you. Great to be with you all. Thank you. Honored, Peter, that you're joining us on this conversation. I think my story in this area really starts when I knew you, working for Vice President Gore. And when you were working for Vice President Gore, you were spending naturally a lot of time on the issue that we were calling back then global warming.
Yeah.
And trying to get people, unsuccessfully, get people to pay attention to a crisis that was still far off, trying to get government to act. This was around the time of the Kyoto Accords. I remember Vice President Gore flying back from Tokyo, and while he was in the air, the U.S. Senate voted unanimously to ban the United States from participating in it.
I don't think they got a single vote, or it was one vote.
I think it was zero, but maybe there was one. And Peter White House was chief of staff to the vice president up here. I was a lowly speechwriter down here, but I got a chance to really go around the country with Vice President Gore, and he would be delivering these speeches to all kinds of audiences. This was before Inconvenient Truth. Before Inconvenient Truth was a PowerPoint, with an easel and whiteboard, and these charts showing CO2 levels in the Antarctic core, and Peter will remember this well. People made fun of him. People called him Al Gore. People,
Ozone Man.
Ozone Man. The smartest people in political roles. Why are you talking about these boring scientific issues that are only relevant to polar bears somewhere when you should be talking about actual issues that affect the country and affect people? And you're not gaining anything, and you're putting yourself in political peril by talking about these things. And what was most important to me was he kept right at it, and he kept on talking about it, and he kept on making the case and trying to convince people, and of course that stuck with me. And so fast forward through a lot of different parts of what I did in the intermittent years. About 10 years ago, a group of us started Aspiration really with the idea of how do we build climate change fighting action into people's daily lives. And we started with financial services for a whole host of reasons. One, that while you were seeing, of course, an increase in ESG investing driven by amazing professionals like Olivia and others, that hadn't really gotten into the lives of most day-to-day people. Most people, of course, don't have a meaningful part of their life tied into investing, but everybody has a checking account. Almost everybody, a lot of people have credit cards. And how do you build sustainability into people's daily lives through that? A big, wide open space. And it's also where you have a lot of power, and you have a lot of important ways to have a lever to move money, to move people's daily interactions, to drive change. And so that was really how we started Aspiration, with building these sustainability focused consumer financial products. As we went along, we started building more and more sustainability products, in some ways separate and apart or on top of those financial products. Things like automated carbon offsetting while you're driving your car, or planting a tree with every purchase you make, and saw those grow and scale really substantially. And then saw more and more businesses coming to us saying, we need to make this journey around our climate future, our climate footprint. And we need to do so in a way that is actually responding to the reasons that we are doing so, which is not necessarily regulatory pressure or investor pressure or government, but in many cases bottom-up pressure. Our consumers are demanding we do this. Our employees are demanding we do this. We know that that is the future of our brand as a company, and if we don't do this, we are not going to be around in 5, 10, 15 years as a successful company. How do we do this in a way that actually has credibility, allows us to feel really good about the steps we're taking, but also allows us to communicate that into what our customers are seeing every day, what our employees are experiencing every day. And so that's been the journey as we've built out what we now really see as sustainability as a service.
So, yeah, great. I want to get back in there, but Olivia, if you could go through, I know you're the Chief Sustainability Officer, also in charge of all the carbon projects that are out there, which is a pretty big job. What is your backstory? How did you get inspired to come to Aspiration?
Oh, well, a multitude of different reasons, not the least of which was the beautiful journey that Andrei just shared with all of us today. And just to think about the history and the vision associated with this company, I think is really powerful and was something that very much attracted me. But as Andrei alluded, my background is in traditional financial services. I spent a decade over at PIMCO. PIMCO is a $2+ trillion asset manager based in Newport Beach, foundation in fixed income. And I built my career creating new businesses and expanding new businesses, kind of mini CEO of different product areas across PIMCO. And I started in global fixed income, which is a very mature business, and then eventually raised my hand to lead a nascent space for PIMCO and many US asset managers, which was ESG investing. I felt like this was going back to my roots. I've always wanted to focus on that nexus between policy, business, and finance, and that space was so powerful for me to see those overlapping circles in sustainable finance. And so finally, about 5 or 6 years ago, I think many of the US-based asset managers started to recognize that this was a global mega trend that was going to influence the way our businesses and asset management were designing themselves for the future. And it wasn't just a phenomenon for European investors, and it wasn't just a phenomenon that was going to last for 3 to 5 years. So raised my hand, started to build out that business. And I think what got me very excited about Aspiration, and when I think about the opportunities outside of traditional asset management, is that in a pure play company like Aspiration that's singularly focused on sustainability and with a focus on financial products and financial services and investment strategy, we can do so much more than the large players in the space who have a legacy of a history that was focused on non-sustainability as their primary kind of original orientation as asset managers, to now getting into sustainability. There's a tension in these large asset managers that just fundamentally won't exist at Aspiration, which means that we can charge ahead faster and with more speed and scale into some of these markets that need more capital, that need more investments, that need more maturation. And the fact that we can do this and to focus on some of these nascent and growing marketplaces is really powerful for me.
Terrific. Really exciting. Really great you were able to entice her to come from PIMCO.
It was a huge
small
win.
little boutique finance operation. When you started Aspiration, I think many people thought of it as you get a credit card and you plant a tree and you're there, but it has grown so much farther from that. And you mentioned the term sustainability as a service. Why don't you flesh that out a bit? I think it's a very exciting development in there. It shows the vision of where you're going.
We're in this place right now, as opposed to where we were in the 1990s, where today most people want to do something about climate change, and yet most people don't know where to start and don't know what to do and don't really feel they have actionable steps they can take. And the truth is, if you want to have large climate impact as an individual, you can buy an electric vehicle, you can put solar panels on your roof, you can go vegan. Those are big, expensive, difficult steps to take. And then there's a lot of small but worthy actions that we can do. We can recycle, we can change our light bulbs to be more energy efficient, which we should do, but are not really going to move the needle. And what we've really focused on is how can we create tools for individuals as well as companies that make sustainability easy, that make it automated, that integrate it into what people and businesses are already doing every day, and yet make it still really meaningful and do something at scale. And that takes many different forms. We really see Aspiration as a process where we're building, hopefully, the definitional platform for sustainability, the place that people and businesses go and they say, okay, it's time for us to get to climate zero. And that comes to life in different ways, whether it is our Aspiration Spend and Save account and debit card, whether it's our Aspiration Zero card, whether it's our Aspiration Plus card. We're going to be launching ways for individuals to eliminate their own carbon footprint, offset their own carbon footprint through subscription in the coming months. Through what we can offer to small businesses who want to go net zero, to employers, all the way up to large enterprises that are looking to how they are going to be on their sustainability journey. And so it really is this almost one-stop shop for sustainability. Everything from showing your carbon footprint through to one of the world's largest global reforestation efforts. We planted 125 million trees in the past year and a half. That is the equivalent of as many trees as there are in Central Park being planted every 2 hours. To one of the world's largest portfolios of high-quality carbon removal projects, which Olivia has been overseeing and we'll talk hopefully a lot more about. And so really that whole panoply of services of, again, helping people and businesses reduce and eliminate their carbon footprint.
And as we were talking, I didn't realize that the 25% of your business really is in the retail space, but 75% is in the corporate space and helping them with their carbon issues and carbon offsets. So maybe give a couple of examples of that. We talk. The one that's favorite to me is the Red Sox. I'm sorry, I happen to be a Red Sox fan, long-suffering. Yankees that are here. We're not going to be in the playoffs, so don't have to worry about being in the World Series. But Red Sox was one of the prominent corporate clients you have, as well as many others. Maybe you could talk about what you actually do for them.
Right. Well, Red Sox is a great example. We work with big companies like Deloitte. We work with foreign entities, the Qatar Free Zone. If you're riding a Lime scooter, there's Aspiration integrated into those rides, so you can make those rides carbon neutral. One of our really best partnerships is with an organization called Athletes Unlimited. The CEO, John Patrikoff, is somewhere out here. There he is. All right. And they've been a fantastic partner of ours, Athletes Unlimited. You see them on ESPN. They're a league of leagues in women's sports. And they became the first sports league in the world, we think, to go carbon neutral. Mm-hmm. And it's an example of what we do, which is we worked with their team to see, okay, what are the carbon emissions of all of the different things they're doing? Yes, scope 1 and scope 2, and so we looked at the power, we looked at the products, but really for whether it's the Red Sox or Athletes Unlimited or many organizations we work with, it's that scope 3. It's all of the people coming to all the games and all of the accommodations and all of those aspects. And so really did a comprehensive review with them, offset their carbon footprint so that they would be carbon neutral, but importantly, brought that to life. And so allow them to tell a sustainability story when people are watching that game on ESPN. We have roundups for trees. Every time on an Aspiration card you make a purchase, we'll round up to the nearest dollar to plant a tree. We did something called Round the Bases. When somebody hits a home run and comes through, we plant a tree. I think we did something called Trees for Threes. That's a tongue twister. When you hit a three-point shot, we plant trees. During the game, bring that up. So it's not just putting out a sustainability report on an annual basis. It's not putting out a press release. It is actually telling a sustainability story. And again, I think whether it's Athletes Unlimited, Red Sox, very similar kind of dynamic where there's other places out there that you can get carbon credits. I'll argue there's probably no place where you can get the size and scale and quality of credits that Aspiration offers, and we make sure we do that right. But there's no place, literally, where we can help a business tell their sustainability story to consumers and to employees, and I think that's really what makes us different.
Yeah. And what you want, I want to get into the projects that you develop for them. But what we want in any of those businesses is for them to try to cut their carbon footprint as much as they possibly can, so that it's not just a greenwashing aspect. You want them to actually be using this for those areas where they can't cut their. And people coming to a game, to the Yankees, the Red Sox, that is what we'd call a scope 3.
Yes.
That's a very difficult thing to offset, to figure out how to limit that carbon footprint. But talk through that a bit.
Yeah, we do it. But we, even in those cases, we encourage that. As Olivia said, the reason we're able to attract amazing people like Olivia to Aspiration, the reason we have all of these carbon project developers on the ground who want to work with us is because we really are mission-driven, right? As she said, pure play. That is what sets Aspiration apart. This is what we do, and this is why we're doing it. And so, for instance, we won't work with a company unless they have clearly defined reduction plans in place that they're working on, because we don't want to be creating something where we're just offering a get-out-of-jail-free card, if you will. We won't work with certain industries because we're not in the business of helping them keep on doing what they're doing. And so we really are building it around the science-based targeting, and maybe I'll turn it over to Olivia because it's her team that's really on the front lines of those conversations and thinking about how do we create those parameters.
No, I think that's exactly right. I was really excited to hear John's speech earlier that really walked through the mechanics and the math behind how net zero really works. Net zero works because we're organically decarbonizing through all of the mechanisms that we have available and are reasonably priced to do today. And then yet there's still residual carbon emissions that no matter how hard we work today, we don't have the technology at scale and at a price point that allows us, any of us, to go carbon neutral or to be net zero today. And we have to engage with carbon removal projects, and we have to engage with carbon projects to help with that residual emissions. Over time, the composition of a carbon neutral company will probably decrease the use of carbon removal projects. And that's a good thing.
That's a good thing.
And we want to encourage that. Where we are today is that Aspiration has a very unique role insofar as we can help advise and consult and engage with companies on their decarbonization. And we have a portfolio of assets of the highest quality carbon removal projects in the world to meet their needs today, tomorrow, and for the next 30 years. And that's really powerful for us. And we know that this is an area that so many large enterprises, small businesses, and individuals really struggle with. Where can I find the highest quality carbon removal projects? On John's blueprint for the next 30 years, carbon removal accounts for 6% of what the global needs are. 6% may not be the 94% that's needed somewhere else, but it's still a really meaningful portion of what's needed to get us all to the net zero objectives and our Paris Agreement numbers and the plans for 2050. And so what we want to focus really on is ensuring that we are building, identifying, sourcing, and originating the top quality projects around the world. And that's not just a passive exercise where we're buying carbon credits in the marketplace, but rather we're cultivating these assets. We have a team of scientists, we have a team of program engagement members who are out in the field with our project developers to ensure the quality and integrity of these programs. We're advising them on our bi-weekly calls with all of our effectively portfolio projects all around the world. We're giving them best practices. We're telling them, have you thought about community development that looks more like this, that's based off of academic research, as opposed to plans that may be simpler and may deploy cash faster, but may not have the intended consequences that you were thinking through. And so we're really collaborative with our partners around the world. We have close to 400 million tons of carbon removal projects in our portfolio to come due over the next 30 years. We're really proud of that work, and it really does take that on-the-ground experience, scientists, policymakers, investors, deal sourcers, to be able to come together and build a portfolio that we can help deliver to all of these different constituents.
That's terrific. Let me just further on that. In order for the corporations to get what they paid for, and they don't have the expertise, they're really relying on you guys to do it. And you've got scientists, you've got this. The commitment to quality is just absolutely essential to do. Maybe talk a little bit about that, but also, we're going to get into the question of planting trees, but there are also there are a number of other areas where the offsets are. So why don't you go through, Olivia, if you would, some of the other areas that create the opportunities for offsets?
Yeah, there's so many different ways to take this conversation, but when we think about quality, the baseline is there are registries out there that create a standard that is identifying a binary outcome. Is this a verified carbon credit or is this not a verified carbon credit? That's a baseline. That's just an entry point into, are you in a carbon credit project, and is this verified by one of the registries? What we at Aspiration do is to focus on raising the bar and ensuring that we're looking at a broader set of definitions of success, thinking about permanence, thinking about avoided leakage, some community impact, co-benefits, community development, economic development. There's so many more dimensions to look at than what the registries are looking at. Again, they're just designed to do a binary exercise. Is this verified based off of these standards or is it not? So the work that we do, I would parallel it because it works for my brain to credit research work in fixed income or in equity research, where S&P, Fitch, and Moody's will give you a letter grade for that company or for that specific security. But of course, any good asset manager would do their own due diligence on the projects and the companies that we're investing in. And so we do the same thing. We have a standard that sits above the expectations of the registries. We're continuing to refine those standards to ensure that we are meeting the expectations of our clients for the highest quality. We haven't used this word yet, but let's talk through that too, which is the reputational risk that's associated with investing in carbon credit projects. And so we have to be very thoughtful and diligent about that approach to ensure that the assets that we're building for our partners around the world meet our expectations. And again, our team is with a long history and background working with the registries, coming from the registries, scientists, economic development kind of experts that help bring to light a lot of the work that we're doing. So that quality component is absolutely critical. The second observation that I would make is it's not a monolithic asset class. It's an asset class that has lots of different types within it. And so, yes, there's carbon removal projects that are focused on reforestation. There's others that are nature-based. There's sea kelp farms that are being created today. Then there's all the technology that's being deployed today in terms of carbon removal, sequestration. There's companies that are using methane and CO2 as inputs for their product development. We want to be scouring the earth for all of those projects and help deploy capital in a catalytic way to help create knock-on effects that are positive for communities, economic development, and the growth of these technologies that are necessary.
Yeah, that focus on the broader set is, I think, really unique and really important to get the kind of quality. So let's dig in. I don't want to get too much into the weeds or the trees, but I do want to talk about the trees. It's the most visible thing that you do. You talked about planting 125 million trees. I think from the research that I've done, 200,000 years ago we had 6 trillion trees, and now on the planet we have 3 trillion trees. So it seems as though we've got a long way to go to reforest everything. But it's actually planting trees is much more complicated. And when you really dig in to the trees, you think about that. Number one, finding partners that can be quality and can actually do what they say, and you're giving them a lot of money. But that's a challenge to it. There's survivability. You're planting a lot of trees, but it may be, and Olivia, maybe
growing the trees, not just planting them.
You need to grow them, and those seeds and seedlings, maybe it's 10%, 20% of what Olivia knows more about that. It's a real challenge, so that when you say you're planting 1,000 trees, you're actually, the ones that might grow may only be 10 or 20. You've got a job creation, which is really exciting in indigenous communities and others in Brazil, et cetera, Indonesia, Malaysia, et cetera. But sometimes there are complications with that come with those issues there. So maybe, Olivia, you could start with talking about those kind of not complications, it's an opportunity at the same time, but we've got to be careful on how we talk about it.
There's so many components embedded in a large program at scale, which is the space that Aspiration is working in. It's not Olivia or Peter or Andrei, going in the backyard and planting a couple trees, right? We're talking about, 125 million trees being planted. So these are large-scale projects. The scale just requires an intensive amount of work that's focused with scientists, biologists, folks who really know the conditions of the specific area in which we're planting, that know what are the appropriate natural seeds to be planting in these areas to help ensure the survivability of these projects. We do unfortunately see sometimes that there are project developers who don't apply the same scientific rigor and start planting non-indigenous plants into ecosystems that aren't prepared for those assets, if you will. And that ends up creating unintended consequences, and typically you don't see the survivability of those assets meeting the thresholds that are needed to create the carbon credit and carbon removal that you would have expected from those projects. So, it's really critical when partnering with project developers around the world to ensure that they've got the appropriate team of scientists, team of biologists deployed every day to be thinking about the survivability of the trees. We also have to think about how do we want to monitor these assets. We're not in Madagascar every day. I mean, Andrei travels a lot, but he's not in Malawi and Kenya every week. So we need to be tracking and monitoring the assets even when we can't be there. We can do that through our partnerships with project developers, with our bi-weekly calls where we're speaking to them about what's happening on the ground. But we can also do more in terms of remote sensing the assets as well, using technology, using satellite imagery. Satellite imagery, by the way, as a technology and as a concept has grown tremendously and is so much more available and accessible to folks like ourselves to track and monitor assets all around the world. Oftentimes, tree planting even happens in parts of Malawi and Kenya and Madagascar that, frankly, you don't want to have partners like ourselves even being present there. These are local communities that are indigenous communities, and we sometimes don't even get an opportunity to be physically there. And that's okay because we can do remote sensing. We've got access to geospatial data. We've got access to satellite imagery. We can even do more creative things. We've been looking at a partner who has acoustics for our forests where we can listen to what's happening. Not that you would listen every day for the birds chirping, though I'm sure that's lovely. What you're looking for is deviation in the acoustics themselves, where perhaps when you see a deviation in the acoustics, what's actually happening is there could be some logging in a part of the forest that you were unaware of because you're talking about huge hectares of land all over the place. So it's really a responsibility to think about the tracking, the monitoring of the assets, the connection back with the scientists, the biologists to ensure that we're planting the appropriate trees for the appropriate ecosystems. And then, of course, there's the survivability issue, which is, today the three of us plant a tree and likely only one of them is going to survive for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Yeah. That's okay. We just need to make sure our math is appropriate for how we expect that forest to grow over time.
Yeah. Do you think that, nature does not care how many trees we plant. Nature cares about how many trees grow. And obviously it takes them a fair amount of time to grow to be able to absorb. Maybe 10 years they start, 20 years. And I think many people may not understand you don't get a credit immediately for having planted a tree. But I wonder if the focus that we should be thinking about focusing more on the survivability rate than the actual issue of planting. And then talk about the credit, maybe Olivia, since you're in charge of all this, talk about when you can establish a credit for planting a tree.
Yeah, typically you don't start seeing large-scale carbon removal from trees that have been planted until years 7, 8, 9, 10 is kind of typically what you would see. Then there's some expectations in terms of receiving that verified carbon credit from one of the registries that we talked about earlier. That there's going to be a survivability rate associated with likely that specific plant that you've planted. Mangroves may have a different survivability rate than pine trees in the upper Pacific Northwest of the U.S., which may have a different survivability rate than sea kelp somewhere in the world, if you're thinking about it from an ocean forest perspective. So each species is going to have a different survivability rate associated with it, and that gives you kind of a buffer for what the expectation is for you planted 100 trees on day one. 10 years from now, we're expecting to see 80 trees growing at scale and size to start the carbon removal project. And then we're talking about large hectares of land being allocated to create carbon removal projects. So it's not really about identifying one specific tree and what's that one specific tree's absorption of CO2, but rather what is the forest doing? Because the forest is an ecosystem that has interoperating features together. It's not just about what is this tree doing, but it's about what do the trees together do with their soil to absorb the CO2, and it's really about a giant ecosystem that's being created in terms of thinking about the CO2 removal and then ensuring that the math associated with those metrics then meet the scientific verified standards associated with these registries.
Great. Yeah, it's a complicated area, and but so important to get into the right kind of details. Andrei, let me come back to you. One of the issues that we have in this space is the amount of data that we have in order to figure out how to get to net zero, and again, a complicated topic. Our old boss, Vice President Gore, is affiliated with a new program called Climate Trace, which is using artificial intelligence as well as satellite technology to pinpoint emissions around the globe. And they're going to be coming out with their preliminary data for every emission all over the globe in about a couple weeks. I think it'll be a blockbuster and really push forward the idea that you know exactly what the emissions are, create a baseline, and then move from there. And I think the data is getting a lot better. The scope, we know about scope 1 and scope 2, the things that are in control of a corporation. The things that are not in the control of the corporation, scope 3, is not very good. But where do you think we are on this, in solving this sort of data issue?
I'm excited about the announcement, and I think we've made leaps and bounds and still have a long way to go. And I think it comes back to a central question. Olivia spoke about reputational risk. There's that for corporations, but I think there's also just a level of distrust, whether it's in businesses or individuals. I talked about that. Most people want to take climate action, don't know where to start. The other piece of that is most people don't know who to trust. And they hear all these different corporations saying we're doing X, Y, and Z, and oftentimes it turns out, well, maybe you're doing X, but not Y and Z, and maybe you're doing X, Y, and Z, but doing it poorly. And that credibility and data as part of that answer is so important to unlock behavior of people who want to take action, but again are hesitant because of that amount of distrust, or corporations. We see this all the time as we're talking to companies who have made pledges, who want to take action, but are held back because of a fear of a misstep in this. And so I think that aspiration standard that Olivia spoke about, that idea that we're going to create this standard that puts our aspiration name and what it means and the credibility we have with 7 million members around the country and the businesses we work with, that puts that name behind something that says we are going to only offer sustainability services that do meet these standards for permanence, for dependability, for improving, not degrading biodiversity, for dealing in local communities into the economic success that's going to come from these projects. And so it is not a situation where the fight against the climate crisis is exacerbating global inequalities, but actually lifting boats of the very people who are on the front lines of that work. All of those are really important for the credibility. On the reforestation, the 125 million trees that we're talking about is separate and apart from the carbon credit projects that we're talking about. The whatever reforestation is going on, that is a whole nother set of trees. That's just on reforestation, and we do that because some people out there are excited for a carbon credit. We find for a lot of consumers, it's hard to visualize a carbon credit, but everybody knows what a tree looks like. We don't have a picture of carbon credits behind us here. We have a picture of trees because it helps people visualize, okay, I took this step. And but even for that, that's not registered, it's not verified. But people want to know, is this really happening? They don't expect that every tree is going to grow, but are you actually taking steps to make sure that you are growing trees and not just throwing a bunch of seeds in the ground and walking away? And so getting it right is so important, and that means data, that means verification, that means follow through, that means really having boots on the ground or eyes in the sky or ears in the forest, all of these steps around ensuring that people have a trusted partner around sustainability, which is what we really want to be.
Excellent.
Peter, can I maybe just interject a concept? You referenced the scope 3, and that's really quite interesting. The scope 1 and scope 2 being much more tangible for companies to think about. I wanted to kind of put out there what we're seeing with some large, very sophisticated companies doing in terms of their scope 3 emissions, because I think it's a worthy observation, which is, scope 3 can include things like your employees coming to the office every day. It can include also your supply chain, which is a really big deal when I think back on John's kind of schemata of all the problems to solve with the 94% of the CO2 that we need to address. These large industrials, these large technology companies have incredible supply chains, and they have incredible reach, and they have incredible influence on their supply chains. And what we're seeing from some of the most progressive and innovative companies is that they're not only thinking about scope 1 and scope 2, which they've done for about a decade now. They're also thinking about their scope 3, and they're not just thinking about their employee travel. They're thinking about reaching into their supply chain and pulling up their suppliers to their standards. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing is that they're doing something called insetting, which effectively is saying, let us reach down into our supply chain, pull the suppliers up to be on the same level that we want our company to be on, both in terms of decarbonization strategies, so helping them think through an organic decarbonization strategy for using more renewable energy, for making all these switches that you can do to help decarbonize. But they're also saying, invest in these projects as well. Invest in the carbon credits that we have identified that are strong, are high quality, are credible, high integrity assets, and come with us on this journey for net zero. And that insetting and that reach into scope 3 with the influence that a company like Apple or Microsoft or some of these major companies who have incredible influence over their supply chains, I think is going to be really fascinating to see how quickly we can lift not just the Fortune 50 companies, not just the Fortune 500 companies, but rather, the depths of the interconnectedness of the global supply chain.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you got that in. I want to come back to Aspiration for a second and ask two questions. We're actually running out of time. I can't believe this went so quickly, but Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, meaning that culture is everything in a company. So I want to ask you two questions. Talk about the culture at Aspiration, and also where are you going to be in 5 years, 10 years?
Culture is incredibly important. I referenced people come for this mission-driven approach, and what we always say is that our culture is defined by that term mission-driven, and that both of those words carry equal weight. That everybody who comes to Aspiration, whether they're our chief sustainability officer or a designer or somebody who works in our communications team or somebody who is an engineer, is coming for the mission, and they're really there. But our mission is incredibly important, and it's difficult, and we're doing something that nobody's ever done before, and we're creating a path, and that requires people to be incredibly driven, too. I sometimes say we're not sitting around singing Kumbaya. We're in a fight to save the planet, and we're working really, really hard every single day to make sure that we deliver on that, and we take that incredibly seriously. And so both of those terms carry equal weight. Look, I think we are seeing an acceleration of passion, interest, activity when it comes to the climate crisis. It's happening for the worst possible reasons, because every single day we are seeing more and more of the ramifications of what's happening, whether it's in Puerto Rico or Pakistan, or just what people are seeing in their communities every day. And so this is accelerating, and I think the question over the next 5-10 years is the negative feedback loops of what happens when you see ice melting and what that then means to all the other parts of the global ecosystem and how that speeds up the climate crisis. Is that going to move faster, or is the virtuous cycle of people seeing that and taking action and taking another action and pushing on their friends and their neighbors and the companies they work with and the companies they buy from and their government to take action? Those are both happening, and both of those are accelerating. And I'm optimistic that that virtuous cycle is going to happen faster than the vicious cycle. We're in a place where we know what needs to be done. Aspiration, I believe, has really a critical role to deliver sustainability at scale to people, to small businesses, to large enterprises. But it is something where all of us, and all of us who are part of this and in this room together need to be part of meeting that challenge.
Yeah. I think that may be the place to end on, that we have a very limited period of time. We need companies like Aspiration to be pushing as hard as they possibly can now in the next 5 years. Some people say we've got till 2030. That gives us 7 years to be able to really turn this ship around, which is a very, very big challenge. But it's exciting that you guys are helping to be part of that solution, and we want you to do it in 5 to 7 years, not 10 years. So keep it going. But please join me in thanking Olivia and Andrei for a terrific presentation.